Hello and welcome to the Cinementalist podcast for Cinementalist.com. My name's Andy. Sitting next to me is Floki, our bearded dragon mascot. And sitting opposite me is Liam. How are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Yeah, I'm better now.
You're better now, yes.
I love it when we have
got the plague, didn't you?
I did, yes. I'd like to start off with an apology because we did miss a podcast last week. I had the flu. Not the big, bad, dreadful COVID, I would like to point out, but I did have the flu for a week, which really, really sucked, man. So we literally couldn't record for a couple of reasons. Number one, Liam sits in the same room as me. We've tried doing the internet recording thing and it just doesn't work because our timings are all off. And two, because for a good 3 days, I couldn't hear, which was fun.
It's also not very conducive to editing. So.
No, I was sitting there.
Because that's the priority, isn't it? Not your well-being. And
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. Normally, I would tough it out through something like that, but it was pretty bad. What was really funny was my girlfriend had the same bug at the same time, so she couldn't hear either. So there was the two of us sitting here trying to watch stuff, going, "What? Hey, you thirsty? No, it's Wednesday."
You're in your 80s already.
Yeah, I know, mate. I'm such an old man.
The past couple of years is done.
I know, yeah. But anyway, apologies for that, but it really, really couldn't be helped. And normally, we record on Thursday evenings, and we normally have Sunday reserved as a backup. So if for whatever reason we can't make Thursday, we record on Sundays instead to meet our deadlines. And on Sunday, I looked like death. I looked like death warmed up. So I'm better now. I have got a really dry cough. I don't know if you can hear any huskiness in my voice. And what I discovered earlier when I was rehearsing my reviews for the podcast is the longer I speak for, the worse the cough becomes.
Excellent.
That bodes well for the 2.5 hours of recording.
Really does, man. Yeah.
Where half of those 2.5 hours, I'm going to be the one speaking.
You have been blessed.
So I apologize if you can hear me cough in the background or some of the coughs I might leave in if they're funny, but I'll try and edit out any of the
if there is like a natural one that sounds like then it's for comedy value.
We were talking about Slayer, the metal band, before we started recording, and I think I could do pretty good Slayer vocals right now. You just got to wake me up at 3:00 in the morning. It'll be that. But yes, anyway, enough apologies. Let's get on with the podcast. Film news to start, of course. First up this week, this is an article from RottenTomatoes.com. Jonah Hill to depict Jerry Garcia in Scorsese's Grateful Dead movie. For many movie fans, director Martin Scorsese may be synonymous with crime films like Goodfellas, Casino, and The Irishman, but there is another side to Scorsese that dates back to some of his earliest work. In 1969, Scorsese was on the scene at Woodstock as one of the assistant directors of the 1970 concert film Woodstock, which they like to point out is fresh at 100%, on which he also served as editor, and other music-related films he directed have included the documentaries The Last Waltz, No Direction Home, George Harrison Living in the Material World, etc., etc. The next band Martin Scorsese will be adapting to film will be the Grateful Dead, with Jonah Hill already attached to star as the group's de facto leader, Jerry Garcia. The film does not yet have a title, but Apple has already stepped up to back the project, following Scorsese's work for them on the upcoming serial killer historical drama, Killers of the Flower Moon. There you go. What do we think of this?
Scorsese doing a Grateful Dead biopic. Thing is, I do love old Marty, but I wonder if his signature style, the style that people associate with all of his, readily recognisable films, that really concise brilliance in terms of marrying image with the soundtrack and all that editing. Does he still have that, like the way that he had it in the days of Goodfellas and Casino?
Yeah, I mean, he did that Stones concert film, didn't he? Shine a Light.
Yeah.
Which I thought actually, it was a little overproduced for me. I mean, ordinarily, if you do a concert film, the focus should be the band. I mean, obviously the focus was the band, but it was there was some stuff in there, some camera angles and things where I'm like, that seems unnecessary. Like a director just going, oh, that's an interesting angle, rather than, hey, people really were there to, you kind of want in a concert film the feeling like you're actually there watching the band. You don't want too many cuts and funny angles and things. It felt a little off.
Yeah, because with those, I mean, I know he has like a wider filmography than the two aforementioned ones, but those two movies in particular, they really showcase this incredible kineticism that he had at that point, like to a seamless degree.
Yeah, and
even though I do have good things to say about The Irishman, but it wasn't of that caliber. And I think, just picturing Scorsese doing a band biopic, one would, I guess, hope that it would have that real punchy seamlessness to it. And I just worry if it's going to carry off as well as he's hoping it will.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm sounding like a proper Debbie Downer. I probably am.
No, I kind of know what you mean. It's not that Martin Scorsese's been making bad films of recent years, but when you compare them to the classics, I mean, nobody can be on top of their game all the time.
No.
Some of the modern Scorsese stuff I've seen has sort of been like it's almost like Scorsese doing an impression of himself, which I know sounds a little bit wanky, but there you go. I said it. Yeah. Welcome to the Cinementalist podcast. But anyway, yes, he's doing a Grateful Dead biopic. It'll be interesting to see what that turns out like.
Jonah Hill as Jerry Garcia.
Yeah, who I'm not a huge fan of, but I can sort of see it. I can see it from like a resemblance perspective, and he's not a bad actor.
Because he's portly, you mean?
Well, and beardy, I suppose. my main impression of Jerry Garcia is beardy.
Yeah. Jonah Hill, never been that impressed.
Yeah,
I'm afraid. But
maybe this is his chance to shine. We shall see.
Yeah, hopefully so.
Also, a lot of reports of him being a really difficult to work with arsehole on set, but you never know whether those are true, do you? But hey ho.
Yeah. Can't say I'm surprised.
Yeah.
No, that's very, very prejudicial, seeing as I don't know the man whatsoever, but intuitively.
Yeah, I always take stuff like that with a pinch of salt, but I thought I'd throw it in there because there have been quite a lot of reports with Jonah Hill that he's quite difficult to work with and above his station, shall we say. But
There's no smoke without fire and other shallow platitudes.
Next article this week, this is from EmpireOnline.com. This is an article entitled Foo Fighters Are Under Threat in a First Look at Studio 666. About a month ago, word emerged that Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters, not content with recording their latest album and working on some typically creative music videos, had secretly shot a horror movie. We now have the first sneak peek at Studio 666, so you can look up the article if you want to see the trailer. I'm sure it's on YouTube and everywhere else. Grohl cooked up the story for the film, while Jeff Buller and Rebecca Hughes wrote the eventual script, and BJ McDonnell called the shots. Studio 666 follows what happens when the legendary rock band rents an Encino mansion steeped in grisly music history to record their 10th album. Trouble is, frontman Grohl is creatively blocked, and when evil forces in the house sink into his consciousness, the creative juices begin flowing, but so does the blood. Can Foo Fighters complete the album with the band still alive to tour?
Is this where is this gonna run? Is it gonna be available streaming? Is it gonna go to theaters or?
Open Road has the worldwide rights, and the movie has carved a 25th of February stateside date next year, although we're still awaiting word of an international launch. So it doesn't really say, but it sounds like generally if something's going to be streaming only, it says it in the article, if they've announced already, it does sound like it might get a theatrical release. Yeah. I don't know about the whole, we've done a premium special before about musicians that have crossed over into being actors, and there are some very successful examples, Chris Christopherson, etc., but the whole rock band doing a horror parody kind of thing, it doesn't have quality written into the DNA of that, does it? I don't know.
I'd be interested to see it for sure. I mean, the Foo Fighters
could be really fun.
Yeah,
if they get kind of a schlocky kind of thing going with it. It could be
the Foo Fighters trying to record their album in a haunted house. It does, on the surface, it does sound kind of hilarious, but.
Is it one of those things? It sounds like one of those things you'd have in like a stoned conversation.
Yeah.
Hey man, wouldn't it be funny if we did like a horror movie and it could be like we're making the new album, but Grohl gets possessed. Oh man, let's do it, And they've got the money to just sort of, make that happen.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So, rather than maybe turning around at any point and going, is this actually a good idea, or was it just a funny joke?
You know what we should do right now? We should get some Sicilian pizza, bro.
Yeah.
That shit's amazing.
I'm all down for that kind of creativity, but it doesn't often work out in the fruition. But yes, that's two new potential releases that we haven't seen and we're really, really down on. Let's up our game a little bit here. Let's go for something that I think is going to be quite positive. Still from EmpireOnline.com. Nicolas Cage playing Dracula in Universal's Renfield. What do you do when you have one Nicolas in your film, but you feel that's just not Nicholas-y enough? If you're director Chris McKay, you add another. Nicolas Cage is joining Universal horror adventure Renfield, ready to sink his teeth into the role of Dracula. The other Nicholas, by the way, is Holt, who has been attached to the film since August. The script has some horror pedigree, as the Walking Dead comics creator and TV producer Robert Kirkman pitched a new take on the character, which the studio snapped up. Rick and Morty writer Ryan Ridley handled the actual scripting chores, and while there are still few details left to be found, it'll apparently be a present-day story and not a period piece. Renfield has traditionally been portrayed as festering in an asylum following his time with the Bloodsucker, so it'll be fascinating to see what the new take is. According to The Hollywood Reporter, the tone here is more adventure story with a vein of comedy, which sounds perfect for Cage, who, after all, already has experience with cinevamps. It'll mark Cage's return to big studio filmmaking and quite the coup for the movie. Just think of the gifts.
See, I was hoping that when you started describing that, I was hoping that this was going to be a Cage picture in the vein of something like Mandy or The Colour Out of Space. But now you mentioned that it's a big studio adventure with comedy sprinklings.
I think the most...
I mean, again, we are... you
were supposed to be positive about this one. I thought you'd be up on
very
this film.
negative like tonight. I'm sorry about this. But, well, yeah, because Nick Cage's Dracula is a good USP.
Sure. Everybody can agree with that.
That does attract me to it significantly. It's the adventure comedy bit. I would be a lot more interested if they were like, we're actually going to do I mean, the modern day thing is fine. If you could say a modern day rendition of Dracula as a horror film with Nick Cage's Dracula, I'd think, holy shit, I'm booking tickets for that. But the adventure comedy bit just makes me feel a bit meh.
Well, I think the upside of that is Rick and Morty writer Ryan Ridley being involved doing the script. I mean, Rick and Morty is many, many things, but it's often, gut-bustingly funny. Hopefully that solves the comedy. I can see the comedy angle if it's done in a Rick and Morty kind of fashion, that kind of irreverent, almost gross out kind of humor. I think it'll work as long as it doesn't end up being a scary movie kind of deal. And Nick Cage, you never know what you're going to get, do you?
Well,
is it going to be one of his wild out there performances that actually ends up being really good, or is it going to be one of his wild out there performances where it's Nick Cage doing the Nick Cage thing for the sake of being Nick Cage?
Well, in Vampire's Kiss, he runs down the street going, I'm a vampire, I'm a vampire, I'm a vampire.
Which is presumably why he's been picked, I would have thought. But we'll see what happens with that one. A little bit of a casting call here. This is sort of an advertisement almost. Kitbag producers hunting for fit men to play Napoleon's army. The makers of Kitbag are looking for ultra-fit extras to portray Napoleon's army. Ridley Scott's historical drama will star Joaquin Phoenix and Jodie Comer, and film bosses are said to be laying on a boot camp where tough guys can prove their worth. Hopefuls have also been urged to grow their hair and beards before filming begins early next year in order to achieve the period look. The producers of Kitbag say in an advertisement, all are required to attend vigorous military boot camp training in this historically accurate period drill. The best candidate will reportedly be invited back for a more high-profile appearances in the film, which stars Joaquin as French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte in February and March. I'm really, really looking forward to this film. I just put this in because I like any news about Kitbag. I've already seen this film in my head, which is probably a bad idea. I don't know if it'll live up to what I expect it to be, but Ridley Scott historical epics normally have something to them. And yes, if you are a fit young man, please do apply.
Yeah. Well, The Last Duel was absolutely fantastic. So, yeah, I've been anticipating Kitbag. I don't know, have they got any kind of projected release dates? Is it sort of late next year or something?
Yeah, I mean, Ridley Scott is famous for his high work rate. It normally takes him a year to make a film, if that. He's normally got a couple on the go over the course of 1 year. And it's to begin filming at the start of this year coming, so 2022. I would expect, given Ridley Scott's ridiculous work ethic, I would probably, there's no release date yet, but I would expect it to be out Christmas, this time next year, I would have thought. Probably same sort of timing as The Last Duel.
Yeah, well, he's already knocked out 2 this year, so...
I've seen interviews with him where he said the most frustrating part of his job is that actors get to do 2 or 3 films a year, but directors only really get to make 1. And he's desperate, he's aware of the fact that he's in his 80s. And he's got all these ideas and things that he wants to get done. So he's got this incredibly tight crew around him that he uses to try and speed up the production process as much as possible. I mean, those reshoots that he did to replace Kevin Spacey in All the Money in the World, he did those in, I think, 2.5 weeks. And bear in mind that Christopher Plummer, who eventually ended up playing the character, was drafted in last minute and he's the primary character of the film. That's kind of an amazing production schedule. I mean, he really does crack the whip, does Scott.
Oh, 100%. And it sounded like a little bit serendipitous, lucky accident, really, because Christopher Plummer as that horrible, sort of ruthlessly greedy bastard of a grandfather, it seems more naturally fitting than having Spacey in the role.
Yeah.
Not even mentioning, Spacey's, any of that stuff. It just makes more sense for it to have been Christopher Plummer.
Apparently Ridley Scott was particularly furious in that he didn't want Spacey in the role in the first place. It was the studio push because they wanted a big name in the role. He actually wanted Christopher Plummer from the get-go. And then he used Kevin Spacey, and then all the allegations came out, and he had to go back and do what he originally intended to do anyway, but extend the production, which he doesn't like doing because he runs his life on this ridiculous schedule. But yeah, he ended up actually getting the film he wanted. And absolutely, having seen the film, and I think it's not a mind blower or anything, but I thought it was really, really solid. And it's very difficult to imagine Kevin Spacey in that role. I agree with you.
Do you reckon there was any behind the scenes at any point Ridley rubbing his hands together, going like, "Now I get to make the film I want, and Spacey will be no more"?
It's one of those moments, I think, where you just go, if you guys had just listened to me in the fucking first place, none of this would have happened. I mean, he's pretty much one of the biggest directors in the world. He's definitely top 5 at the very, very least. You'd think he'd get to be able to pick his own cast, wouldn't you? Even Ridley Scott gets railroaded into who's going to star in his films.
Yeah, that does surprise me. I would have thought that he would have just had too much of a command to, for the studio to say that you have to do what we want you to do.
Or maybe he's reached the point where he's just like, look, I know how this works. There's no point arguing. You're going to go for this actor anyway. Look, I'll work with it. I want to get the film done. I wonder, he seems like that kind of old school pragmatist, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a fair shout.
My last article this week, this is actually an article about an article, but it's how I found it in the first place. This is from avclub.com. They do a segment called Read This, where they post articles they found across the web that they think their followers might be interested in. It's entitled, Read This. Succession's Jeremy Strong is very committed to acting with a capital A. Sometime between Daniel Day-Lewis's Oscar-winning turn as Daniel Plainview and Jared Leto sending his Suicide Squad co-stars condoms and dead rats, the general public lost their stomach for so-called method acting, a term so divorced from its original meaning that it's basically become shorthand for arsehole on set. No one told Succession's Jeremy Strong, though. No one is interested in stopping him either. According to a fascinating New Yorker profile on the 42-year-old actor, his inability to discern himself from his character is part of the show's secret sauce. It's entitled, On Succession, Jeremy Strong Doesn't Get the Joke. I reviewed Succession last week. One of the things I pointed out about it is that I wouldn't classify it as a comedy. It's a drama with a lot of comedy lines and definitely, it's like 60% drama, 40% comedy, but primarily drama.
Yeah.
As far as Jeremy Strong, who plays Kendall, the heir apparent to the Empire that eventually ends up fighting against his dad, and there's a big family split and all of that. Apparently, according to Jeremy Strong, it's not a comedy in the slightest. He doesn't see anything funny about it. So much so that he's said to Kieran Culkin, who plays Roman Roy, who is very much one of the funniest characters on the show, that he was worried that people would watch it and think it was a comedy. And Kieran Culkin said, well, I'm pretty sure it is. I've got all these funny lines. They're obviously funny on the page. I've been delivering them funny. Everyone's happy with me delivering them funny. I'm pretty sure it's a comedy. I mean, what I get from this profile, it's a very, very interesting read. And the reason I brought it up is that I think anybody listening to this podcast is interested in actors and acting beyond the actual media itself, the methods behind it, whether that's Stanislavski or whatever. He comes across as a really, really interesting and quite strange guy. He actually worked as an assistant to Daniel Day-Lewis for a number of years.
This is starting to make a lot of sense now.
Yeah, and people that have known him from his very, very early days have said that he's quite a obsessive person and quite a strange and compulsive person with it. And whether he's doing method acting or not, I mean, he denies the accusation, I suppose. I like that whole thing about method actors have become synonymous with arseholes. He denies being a method actor. He just essentially says, look, whatever gets me the performance gets me the performance, which sounds very nuts and bolts in a very Gary Oldman, Brian Cox kind of way, actually. There's a nice quote from Brian Cox in this article about how he likes the performance and he thinks Jeremy Strong's a great actor, but he does worry about him in terms of how far he goes with it. I mean, he deliberately isolates himself from people on set. And this all works really, really well with Succession because he's the son that breaks away from the family and starts going against the party line, so to speak. Is definitely something that's making it work. And as well, his character, Kendall, doesn't think he's funny. He doesn't see the humor in anything. He plays it completely straight. And it seems to be the actor himself doesn't get the joke either, and that's what's making it work. I find it absolutely fascinating. So please do check out this article on the NewYorker.com. You don't have to go through a paywall or anything like that, but it is, I found it really, really revealing and a very interesting study of what seems to be quite a complicated and I don't know, is he going to be the Daniel Day-Lewis of the new generation or what? But he seems to be quite an eccentric and I found it fascinating. So there you go, a little bit of light reading for the cinementalists out there.
That does sound pretty damn funny, actually. The fact that he doesn't see any comedy whatsoever. He himself sees no comedy whatsoever in. I mean, you and everybody else who have spoken to me about that show mention about how when the humor comes, it is thick and fast and really, really you cannot help but bust a gut. So.
But the quote underneath the article actually says, "I take him as seriously as I take my own life," he says of his character Kendall Roy, and Kendall's obliviousness is a lot of the humor. So there's something strange at work there. Anyway, okay then. Well, that's the end of the news this week. Liam's got a couple of film reviews for you as usual. What have you got?
First up, would you be interested in a bit of lamb? Do you like lamb?
I'm okay with lamb.
I'm a big fan of lamb. And
I presume you're not taking me to dinner.
No, I'm not. I'm actually treating you to a rundown of a film called Lamb. Now, this is a new Icelandic film, actually. It's directed by Valdemar Johansson and co-written by him and Sean, which is the name of an Icelandic screenwriter and author. It's spelled Sjon, but it's pronounced Sean.
Okay.
So, and it just feels a bit weird reading it and saying that way, but that is the pronunciation. Well, Valdemar and Sean have come up with this delightful little tale set in the deepest, darkest rural Iceland. We open up on a farm, and there's a herd of horses in a mist, and they suddenly get spooked by something, and they run in the opposite direction, like almost in stampede-like fashion. We cut to a little which I suppose the kind of barn that you herd sheep into, like a sheep pen, like a large sheep pen barn thing. And the sheep are all in there. And they start hearing very, very sinister, heavy breathing. And all the sheep sort of start looking around, and the audience can't see it, but there's something in the doorway. And it pans back to the faces of the sheep, who all start, I don't know what the hell the noise they make is. A cat's meow, sheep do whatever they do.
Bleat.
Yeah, bleat, sorry. Yeah, bleat. So the sheeps are bleating, and they get very frightened of whatever this presence is outside. And then we cut to Maria and Ingvar, played by Numi Rapace and by Hilmir Snare Gudnason. These two are a married couple who very sadly lost their daughter, Arda, a little while ago, and they are the owners and operators of this farm. They seem to lead quite a sort of peaceful, cozy, and rather loving little existence, despite the horrible tragedy that they suffered. And one day they're milling around, and they're doing some cleaning up, and they're also they're helping a sheep give birth. And they make quite an alarming discovery, in that one of the lambs has the head of a lamb, but the body of an infant human girl.
Okay, now I'm interested.
Yes.
Scared sheep didn't interest me much, but
this is something that's revealed in the trailer, by the way, so that's not a spoiler.
Okay.
It's revealed in the trailer that, yes, this newborn, yes, head of a lamb, body of a human baby girl. And Maria and Ingvar are very sort of shocked and taken aback at first. But then there's an unspoken resolve between them to take this child creature, this hybrid, this very, very shocking hybrid, in and to raise her as their own child. It's essentially as a replacement for their deceased daughter, Arda, and they actually end up naming the lamb girl Arda. And
despite the fact that it's got a sheep's head.
Despite the fact that it's got a sheep's head, they just decide, no, we're going to adopt her and we're going to bring her up as our own. We've been given a new chance. However, sort of immediately bizarre it might seem and horrific to some people, we're going to do it. We're going to raise her as our own. We're going to give her a loving upbringing. Well, as soon as they decide to do this, Arda's birth mother, the sheep who was, say, beset by that loudly breathing aforementioned thing from the start of the film, she keeps showing up outside the home because she is sus that Ingvar and Maria have taken her kid and raising it as as if it's their own, and she keeps lingering outside the house and bleating and making lots of noise. And eventually Maria gets very, very frustrated with this, and she ends up shooting the sheep, shooting Ada's birth mother. From that point on, the film sort of, it's a study, it's sort of like a familial drama study in one sense, coming from one angle, because a lot of it is Maria and Ingvar raising Ada and just doing things that parents would usually do with their kids, you know, taking her out, being very affectionate with her, you know, helping her, you know, encouraging her to learn and be inquisitive about the world around her. And they do, as parental figures go, they seem pretty damn good at it. But after a little while, this burgeoning familial bliss is interrupted by the arrival of Ingvar's brother, Peter, played by Bjorn Hilner Haraldsson, who is he's an ex-musician, and he's been tossed at the side of the road by some people he was driving around with. He seems to be a bit of a ne'er-do-well, bit of a deadbeat, little bit of a snake in the grass. He shows up to Maria and Ingvar's place looking for a place to crash, and he's immediately repelled by the sight of Ada, and he says to the couple, "What the fuck are you doing? This is not your child. This is an animal." And he's very sort of silently hostile and unpleasant towards Ada. As I said, it's partially familial, you know, a study of familial life with a little bit of dysfunction inserted in there, with obviously a very, very, very strange conceit. And conceit is also approached from another angle. The thing that gives the film its extremely eerie horror elements in that Ada's mother has been shot by Maria for continuously pestering outside the home. But whatever got Ada's mother pregnant is still out there. And it's a something, and it's a rather worrying something, and it's lingering around, and it's not very fucking happy about what Maria and Ingvar have done. So blending, I'd say 80% rather somber and contemplative family drama with very atmospheric slow burn horror, which is quite sort of the signature template of A24. I think that Lamb does this really successfully. The cinematography, you know, I mentioned about when I mentioned a couple of Icelandic films in premium episodes, and just mentioned that a common factor between them was just how they are stunning to look at. The cinematography is just the capturing of rural Iceland with the sort of fog rolling mountains and the massive green and grey expanse, and just this really, it's sort of like a real fantasy land, the kind of images that are conjured when you're reading, you know, a Tolkien novel, something like that. Just this epic, mysterious expanse that is brilliantly captured in Lamb. Noomi Rapace and Goodison and Haraldsson, all the cast, they give absolutely solid performances. You do believe these characters. You become intimate with them. You care about their journey. And it really, this film does a really good job at involving you emotionally, in spite of the fact that it's about two people raising a baby girl that's got the head of a fucking sheep.
It's initially a ridiculous concept.
No,
it
is.
It sounds quite high drama, and I'm looking at the poster and it looks quite bleak.
It is, yeah. It is. And despite that, as you say, and I agree with you, superficially on the surface, if you just showed me that synopsis written down, I would just think to myself, well, that sounds ridiculous. You know, but in Johansson's direction and with the brilliant acting, especially Rapace and Goodison, this does become, there is a poignancy to it. There's quite a sharp poignancy, and you come to care about this founded family, as it were, and you do become very strongly fearful for them, because you know that there are elements out there that have a serious problem with what they've done. And you do get inklings that this story may not end very happily. But yeah, I do think that high drama blended with slow burning folk horror. And I was really, really taken with it. I couldn't stop thinking about it for several days afterwards. Yes, it is very weird, but it's a visual feast. The sound, it's got a brilliantly eerie soundscape. The way that the soundtrack, this sort of low rumbling score, the way that really gets under your skin and sets a doom-laden sensation in for the viewer is really, really deftly done. And I just think if you're interested in very compelling drama married with the kind of slow creeping dread that is thankfully bereft of jump scares and gore, if you're interested in that sort of stuff, I'd say Lamb is a very successful combination of those two things. And I think it's definitely one of the finest things I've seen this year.
All right, so stuff.
Check out Lamb. It is very, very bold and ambitious, very interesting, and it gets it right. Thankfully, it gets it right.
Oh, it wasn't on my radar, but it is now. Excellent.
Yeah, definitely check it out, man. Definitely check it out. And then this is the other one that I was going to do last week, but shit happened. I'm not blaming you for being ill, obviously. I'm just
I try my best. You know?
No, I know. But this is this debuted on Netflix on the 1st of December, and I was really anticipating this one. I had wanted to go and catch it theatrically because it was on a limited run, but I could never find a convenient time. So I just decided to wait for the Netflix debut on the 1st of this month. And this is The Power of the Dog. Now, this is based on a novel by the author Thomas Savage, and this takes us back to 1925 Montana. We're introduced to the Burbank brothers. Now, you've got George Burbank, played by Jesse Plemons, who is kind of like he's a very sort of sweet, introverted, not especially confident, but very sort of, polite and thoughtful, sweet teddy bear of a man. And his older brother is Phil Burbank. And these two are, they're wealthy. They own a ranch. And whereas George sort of has a sensitive side to him, wants to get out in the world and maybe make something of a life for himself beyond being a rancher, Phil is essentially the epitome of the rugged individualism of the Old West and America at large, including all of its worst elements. An often spoken about figure in the brother's life, a guy named Bronco Henry, who was he was a rancher and the epitome of ultimate masculinity as far as Phil is concerned. The spectre of this individual hangs over proceedings at all time because Phil, in stark contrast to George, is just a picture of malevolent machismo. He is surly. He is contemptuous of emotional expression. He is very misogynistic. Whenever he notices any of sort of effeminacy in another man, he is very, very scornful. This is a very sour, derisive man who is always quick with an acid tongue and seems to delight in making people feel like shit. He's a nasty prick, Phil. And he regularly addresses George as fatso in every single conversation they have and always takes on a very belittling, mean-spirited tone. He's just he's very, very unlikable.
I can see Benedict Cumberbatch being good in that role.
100%.
Yeah, he's quite good at playing difficult arseholes.
Mate, yeah, you bet your last penny he is. Absolutely. Well, one day, Phil and George and their employees, they're going on a cattle drive. And they've booked an inn for a few nights. And the inn is owned by a woman named Rose, played by Kirsten Dunst, who, as many people know out there, is also Jesse Plemons' real-life spouse. And Rose lives with her son, Peter, played by Cody Smith-McPhee. She was widowed some time ago. And Rose and Peter spend a great deal of their day preparing dinner and general hospitality for George and Phil and their employees. They prepare this great big fried chicken dinner for them. Peter he makes these table roses, but he makes them out of matchsticks because Rose, his mother, used to be a bit of a dab hand at floristry, and he makes them as sort of a bit of a quirky decoration. And as soon as the men sit down, Phil, who has already begun loudly regaling the other people at the table with tales of, me and Bronco Henry did this, I remember this and that, very kind of boisterous bravado. and boasting, rather, with not just a slight hint of antagonism. He notices that Peter is a young man who has a very sort of light and shy and retiring and somewhat effeminate demeanor, and he immediately pounces on him and just starts ridiculing him and being very mean to him. And this greatly upsets his mother, Rose. As soon as the other guys, including Phil, retire to their rooms for the night, George enters the kitchen and sees Rose crying her eyes out and sort of does his best to console her. And she's very, very appreciative of this. And she's noticed how George is not like the other guys. He keeps his mouth shut a lot of the time. And when he does open it, it usually isn't to say something unpleasant. As I said, he is essentially just a pretty nice, normal guy. Well, they both catch feelings, as that horrible neologistic term goes. George and Rose, they begin to like each other, and eventually they end up getting married, and George helps contribute to funding for Peter to go off and attend university, because Peter, as well as helping his mother with waiting and sort of general food preparation, he also has a great interest in like vivisection and exploring cadavers and stuff. So George funds Peter's university excursion, and he also, after marrying Rose, he brings her to live back at the ranch with him. Well, Phil is not in the least bit happy about this, and he proceeds to make general day-to-day life an absolute misery for the pair of them and just about anyone else who comes into his path, just goading them, relishing the opportunity to highlight their failings, being both passive-aggressive and very, very directly aggressive, just absolutely commits to driving them to utter despair. But then eventually young Peter arrives back to the ranch after attending university, and Phil, he picks up where he left off upon first encountering him in the restaurant, is, just derisive. He's not outright ignoring him and just treating him like a non-entity. He's being abusive and just very callous. But, and I'm going to have to be careful here because I don't want to spoil too much. But then, with all of this setup, everything that's been mentioned about these characters, there are secrets that come to light, essentially about everyone in this, all these characters that have found themselves together at this house. There are behavioral secrets, historical secrets, hidden sectors of personality that are gradually illuminated because of, all their sort of convergence there, intentional or otherwise. And it goes down a very surprising and smart and very sort of with cunning obliqueness, the way it's played. It does a very, very smart and compelling 180, as it were, in which you're delivered, peccadillos and intentions that do really kind of throw you off kilter. And they hurtle towards a very, very memorable conclusion. And, Benedict Cumberbatch, as you said before, I am hoping that Benedict Cumberbatch is entered into an Oscar category for his performance in this. His performance as Phil Burbank is absolutely excellent. Honestly, you were absolutely right in guessing that. He lives and breathes this guy. Every facial expression, just the way that he extends his words, the way that he looks at people, the way he walks around, the way he reacts, because an often repeated thing about good acting is that it's reaction. And Benedict Cumberbatch I've liked Benedict Cumberbatch in many roles I've seen him in. I've never thought that he was, a middling actor at all. I've always thought he was very talented. But this is his role in The Power of the Dog. His work in The Power of the Dog is something that has really jumped out at me with him. I was fully immersed by him as Phil Burbank because he is such a detestable guy. But then, as the narrative develops, you learn things that makes him take on a bit more of a shroud of complexity. There's sort of little nooks and crannies in there where, humanization and possibly a little bit of empathy for the man does creep in, although at the outset it seems totally and utterly impossible. Similarly, Cumberbatch is met in this performance power by Kirsten Dunst. Kirsten Dunst as Rose is phenomenal because she starts off as this garden variety pleasant, nice, relatively just prim woman, as in just well-mannered, just good-natured. But with Phil's constant abuse, she starts to hit the bottle rather heavily. And the way that Dunst plays the transition from just, regular, nice and agreeable Jane to sort of despondent and erratic alcoholic is just an absolute ace. Honestly, it's really, really well shot. Smith McPhee's performance is very good because he plays Peter with a very satisfying, appropriate degree of mystery. And Plemons, I've always liked Plemons. Plemons does, he's serviceable here. I know that might seem like a bit of a pejorative word. It's not meant to be. Plemons does do good work, but Cumberbatch and Dunst, they are the primary reasons to see this film. They will absolutely knock you out. And it's really, really visually lush. And, even people think, it's a Western in the 20s. The setting is the familiar trappings of the Western genre. There is essentially a subversion of those things here. And it goes, it's Jane Campion. If you've seen the piano and some of her other works, she doesn't just deal in genre fare. There is, as with a lot of her other stuff, there are interesting psychological, emotional things being drilled here. And I think it's a really, really good film. And I would strongly advise everyone to see it.
Yeah, good stuff, man. Awesome. Okay, then. Well, this is the point where I normally do TV of the week. I haven't really been watching any TV that's new because I've had the flu and I haven't been able to hear, which means I've been watching old stuff where I know what the dialogue is. It would be a little bit unfair, I think, to review something when I couldn't hear it properly. But before I got the flu, I did watch a very interesting documentary that cropped up on UK Netflix. Now, this came out in 2017. This is a documentary film, by the way. It came out in 2017. I believe it's been on US Netflix for a while, but it's only just arrived on UK Netflix. And I was aware of it, hadn't seen it before, and I found it very, very interesting. So I thought that would be my review this week. This is called Voyeur. Aware of this one?
Is this the one about the two guys and one of them's a motel owner?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Well,
am I thinking of something different?
No, you're on the right track. But
okay, right.
There's a key point that I will get to. But yes, American documentary film directed by Miles Caine and Josh Curry. And it essentially starts out telling the tale of Gay Talese, who is no laughing at the back, by the way, is a very, very well-respected investigative journalist in the US. Has written for just about every major publication you can think of. Most of them sort of liberal, left-wing leaning kind of publication, New York Times, The New Yorker, that sort of thing. But he made his name in the 70s and the 80s, primarily through a series of books that were collections of his articles on his investigative journalism into things like sex cults, in which he himself, in order to get the full breadth of the story, was a willing participant, which is rather interesting. So he's always driven towards the deep, dark, interesting, and often sexual. Made a huge name for himself writing these very, very successful books. Well, turns out that Gay had been talking for a very long time to a man in Montana who'd written him a few letters saying, I think you're the kind of writer that would appreciate what I've been doing all these years. And it eventually got to a point where Gay is now in his 80s at the time of this documentary. And the man who was writing to him, Gerald Foose, was in his mid-70s. And so decided that despite the fact they'd been exchanging information over the years, Gerald was very reluctant for his story to eventually be published until he was dead. However, given that the statute of limitations upon what he was up to was now essentially run out, he figured he was pretty much safe. You can now go ahead, Gay, before you die, and write these articles and write a book about my experiences. So, let me tell you the story of Gerald Foose. Gerald, with his wife in the 70s and 80s, bought a motel in Montana. Anything, nice, respectable business. It wasn't just for the money, though, although the motel did extremely well. It was because he noticed when he went looking for a motel that this particular building had a large attic above it. And the large attic had vents from the rooms below. And should you wander into the attic, you could wander around and look through the vents into the rooms underneath. Gerald Foose was, and very much still is, I guess, a voyeur. Sexual reasons is the immediate thing you're thinking. And yes, indeed, he did find himself masturbating in the attic while his guests downstairs performed their various daily sexual businesses and cleaning and all the rest. But he actually went further than that. He argues that he's not a sexual pervert, although he certainly did indulge himself in that aspect of it. It was more a sociological study of the people underneath. He kept meticulous notes as to guests at his hotel and all the shenanigans they got up to, whether that was arguments or just weird little bits of human behavior. And so every night he would go up into the attic, he would peer through these vents, he would write these notes, and he had a huge collection of his findings. So he handed all of this over to Gay, and Gay begins piecing together these bits and pieces and these fragments and Gerald Foose's story in order to write articles for the New Yorker and eventually a full book. What the documentary examines is not just the subjects of the voyeur, but also and primarily the publication of these notes via Gay. And it's been criticized by a few people for essentially missing its subject. Now, this is something I'm kind of acutely aware of with documentaries. It's something I always look for in documentaries. Are they actually getting to the heart of the subject? Or can I sense that there's information being held back? Can I sense that they didn't really get to the story? Because this focuses more on the publication of an article and the publication of a book, you would assume that this was actually missing the whole seedy, salacious business, if you like, of the voyeur's story himself. What actually ends up being more interesting than the voyeur is the controversies that arose during the production of the book and the articles. And what's really interesting is that after watching this film, the primary impression that I came away with, and I think most audiences will come away with, is actually that Gerald Foose, although he is most definitely a bit of a pervert and he has definitely committed crimes, he actually comes across as more likable and relatable than Gay Talese, which I do not think was Gay's original intent when he let a documentary crew come into this subject, so to speak. There's a lot of ego to the man and a certain arrogance that comes across that I really don't think he was expecting the documentary crew to find. They've even left in some parts where, while they're trying to interview Gerald and Gay's in the room, Gay starts interrupting and starts going, don't answer that. I'm an investigative journalist. I know what these guys are doing. They're trying to frame this story and he goes off on these tyrannical rants and things like that. And what this actually is a much more nuanced piece than you would initially expect. Yes, it's got the salacious angle, and there's no doubt about it. And some of the things he observes about human behavior is very compelling as well. He said one of the few times that he ever really got angry was he was looking down on a guy who he'd rented a motel room. He was sitting there by himself with a bucket of KFC chicken, and he was wiping his fingers on the bedspread. And apparently Gerald just went nuts and was going to run down there and confront him. And he's like, what the hell am I doing? How could you see me wiping my fingers on the bedspread? Because I was looking at you through a vent in the roof. That would have all gone massively, massively wrong. He also at one point witnessed what he believed to be potentially a murder, which is very, very intriguing. And this whole argument about the statute of limitations being over for these crimes he's committed, it's unclear even to this day as to whether that's really the case. I believe he is being legally pursued. There's a point where when the book actually comes out, and obviously the documentary covers this as well, where people start calling his house. He gets a few death threats and things. And him and his wife are there going, oh my God, this is terrible. Who would have thought this would have happened? Well, me, for a start. I mean, or anybody that was willing to, initially admittedly, when he was initially talking to Gay, he was very, very reluctant to have his actual name used in the piece, although he eventually agreed to it again because he thought the statute of limitations was up. But it does make you question his motives as to why he revealed himself. This whole argument that he makes that he was a sociologist, essentially, that he was interested in just the minutiae of human behavior and what an incredible opportunity he had to do that, sort of holds some weight in the sense that if you were just doing it for sexual gratification and pure out and out voyeurism, I think it's very unlikely that you would eventually agree for your work to be published. He seems to have this sort of hell-bent desire that because he put so much effort into this project of his, if we can call it a project, that he didn't want that knowledge to die with him. His initial, as I said, his initial desire was for everything to be published after he was dead. But then I think he got the idea that, well, Gay's older than me and he's in his 80s now. I guess it should be kind of published now. So there's a lot of things about the human dynamics of things and ego clashing upon ego, which I didn't expect to find in this piece. It's got this sort of lurid PR around it. When you look up the still images on Netflix and the promo splash and all that kind of stuff, it's what you would expect is the classic neon lit motel sign. You immediately they're going for that kind of seedy vibe. And I'm into that. Why not? You know, we're all voyeurs on some sort of level. And that's actually one of the things the documentary kind of makes you think about is that, I mean, I don't want to sound seedy here, but everybody's curious about what goes on behind closed doors, aren't they? I think we can all admit that about ourselves.
Yeah, of course.
I just don't think most of us will be, I don't know what the term is. I don't want to use the term brave, but I don't think we'd have the chutzpah to peer into somebody's window or peer through a vent or something like that. This guy did.
I would.
Would you?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. What's the statute of limitations in this country? I don't think we have that, do we?
I'm not going to say anything specific.
But yeah, I found it actually to be a far more interesting piece for the fact that it does abstract itself from its key subject. I think as well, a fair bit of that is probably because this book did eventually end up being published. It is the Voyeur's work. And I imagine Gay put his foot down and said, well, look, if you film everything, the entire story, then no one's going to buy my book. Although one of the revelations that's later revealed, that I'm not going to go into too much because it is a bit of a spoiler, but I'll tread gently around it, is that Gerald and Gay's journalistic integrity is called into question at a few points. So the book is regarded as no one's quite sure how much of it is fact and how much of it is fiction, which muddies the waters even further on the subject. Ultimately, I found this quite a deft bit of work. I thought it flitted in and out of the difficulties of what it was trying to portray quite admirably. It's about an hour and a half long. It's well staged. It goes through its story nicely. I like that it manages to capture a darker side of somebody who's putting themselves forward as the moral sort of person of the subject, the journalist himself. Oh, you know, I'm above all of this. I'm a journalist that's written for the New Yorker. You know, I'm above reproach. You can't question me.
So Gay is like, he's an arsehole, basically.
I would say so. Yeah, he does come across as one in this. I definitely think that's not what he would have intended.
They rarely do, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was ego and hubris that allowed him to agree to it in the first place. I think this entire endeavor actually has backfired against him massively and has made people look at as a journalist, any good journalist knows that, unless you're going to go for sheer gonzo journalism, this sort of old school journalism of which Gay is very much a proponent, and that's the background he comes from. A big part of that is staying out of the work, not letting yourself become the story, whereas Gay, through his own ego and hubris, has very much become almost a bigger story than the Voyeur himself.
Why can't more people just be like Louis? Louis does it right, doesn't he? Old Mr. Theroux.
Yeah, I mean, he sort of puts himself in the way very gently, in a way that's very, in a way that no other documentary maker, I think, has been able to pull off. He's sort of unique. In that
very
respect.
Gently for the purpose of getting as much revelation as possible. That's how you do it correctly. And that's how you do it in a way that also emotionally engages the audience as well as intellectually engages them. That's the proper way to do it. But that's not like besmirching the very old school style of having your suit and your microphone and just asking straight questions. There's nothing wrong with that.
It's almost like he doesn't know where to stand with that because, like I said, some of his most famous works are him participating in orgies and things to look into what was considered at the time. Bear in mind, we're looking at 70s and 80s here. Was considered at the time sort of a morally repugnant part of America. Putting himself into the piece he viewed as essential to getting the best out of that story. A lesson he seems to have forgotten with this one because he's inserted himself into the piece. And as a result, this documentary has actually managed to subvert his own work because what he thought he was doing was inviting a documentary crew in to see the publication of one of his best pieces of work. And so that they can focus on the Voyeur and what an incredible story this is. What he's actually got himself into is a story about two very flawed men, and one of them is him. And isn't that kind of fantastic?
That sounds really compelling. No, but it's just, because that's the thing is, and it does sound really interesting because also another thing that comes to mind is when you take fear and, that kind of gonzo journalism, that real hands-on, journalistic involvement. Yeah, you obviously have instances like Fear and Loathing, where it just so happened that the exploits of Hunter S. Thompson happened to be more interesting than the derby he was covering.
Yeah.
Like, it happened to actually be a lot more compelling than this fucking silly race that you turned up to document. But that wasn't him going, oh, look at me and how impressively crazy I am. He was just being himself. Mm-hmm. And that's how it organically unfurled.
The honesty came across, whereas the interesting thing with this is that it's almost the dishonesty that comes across.
It sounds like an inversion. Right?
I wasn't expecting it. I was expecting this salacious big bang, what do people get up to when you view them? What's the line between observing somebody for sociological purposes and getting your jollies off of watching people in their private moments? What I actually got was quite a nuanced perspective on journalism and moral lines, which is very, very cool. Wasn't expecting to do it. Bit of a backflip. Thought it was very, very compelling, very watchable. Really good piece of work.
I was familiar with this one, and now that you have given it this, because I'd heard of it and I was kind of had a modicum of interest. I thought that sounds kind of intriguing, but with that rundown you've given, I think I'm 100% going to check it out as soon as possible now.
Yeah, please do.
It does sound really up my street.
It did make me laugh out loud a couple of times going, oh, you idiot.
Well, I've always got time for that.
Yeah. Okay, then let's finish out the podcast as we always do with a bit of trivia. I thought I'd do trivia on Benedict Cumberbatch.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Admittedly, I don't know a hell of a lot about the guy, so...
It struck me as an opportunity, actually, because I'm definitely going to check out The Power of the Dog, by the way, because I've always been a fan of Benedict Cumberbatch's work. I think he's a very, very skilled and talented actor. It suddenly struck me that we often do actor specials on the premium, and Benedict is probably a way off of getting one, because we generally tend to do them with actors that have had a very long career, and Benedict is still very much...
Old people.
Yeah, essentially. And not that we haven't done younger people before, but I get the feeling that if we were to do a Benedict Cumberbatch special, we'd probably do it in a few years' time. Yeah, because there's definitely more great work to come from him. And when we do those specials, normally at the end, I do some trivia about the actor. I thought, actually, you know what? Let's go for it this time. Let's do some Benedict Cumberbatch trivia.
Why not?
Seeing as he's supposed to be so fantastic in The Power of the Dog. Let's talk about this for a start. There's something very regal sounding about a name like Benedict Cumberbatch. It's also really fun to say. But it's not one that necessarily rolls right off the tongue. The Washington Post once identified the actor as Bandersnatch Cummerbund, although later clarified that it was a joke. But there have been plenty of other mix-ups, like the time a television show ID'd him as Benedict Cumberpatch, which sort of has a nice ring to it. Cumberbatch had a feeling that his name might cause problems in his career, which is why he began as Benedict Carlton, which is his middle name. Ultimately, it was his agent who convinced him to use Cumberbatch, even though the actor has said the surname sounds like a fart in the bath. He's got a female fan club as well, hasn't he? They call themselves the Cumberbitches.
Yeah.
Which apparently he's really quite unhappy about because he's he's done a lot of work for like feminist charities and things like that. He's like, please don't call yourself the Cumberbitches. Please call yourself the Cumber People or something that.
It's a compliment.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Oh, God, sensitive Benedict.
Eggs Benedict, by the way, my favourite breakfast.
Absolutely, yeah.
People always want to know more about us as hosts. I love Eggs Benedict.
Well, when you sit down to watch The Power of the Dog, make yourself up some Eggs Benedict.
Yeah.
Say, and also polish it off with a Bloody Mary as well. Say, Eggs Benedict, Bloody Mary, best Christmas breakfast you'll ever have, trust me.
I bet you weren't expecting a breakfast recommendation in the trivia of the podcast.
Do it.
You've had one. While filming the 2005 miniseries To the Ends of the Earth, Cumberbatch experienced a kind of epiphany when he nearly lost his life. The actor and two of his co-stars took a day off to learn how to scuba dive near Mozambique. On their way back from the outing, the actor explained, "The three of us were trying to change a tyre. These 6 men suddenly appeared from the eucalyptus. They said, 'Put your hands on your head, don't look at us,' and were frisking us for drugs, money, and weapons. Then they bundled us into the car. They dragged me up and put me in the boot." Like so many of the quick-thinking characters that he has played, Cumberbatch realised his only option was to try and argue his way out of the situation. "I said, 'If you leave me in here, it's not the lack of air, it's the small space. There's a problem with my heart and my brain. I tried to explain to them, I'll die, possibly have a fit, and it'll be a problem for you. I'll be a dead Englishman in the back of your car. Not good.' They shut the boot and had an argument and then pulled me out. So I kind of thank God I had the presence of mind to give them the idea that it'd be better to keep me alive, and the other two weren't harmed."
Wow.
There you go, yeah. That sounds absolutely fucking terrifying.
Yes, it does. Just a tad.
But apparently it's encouraged him since. I've got a little bit at the end about his love of extreme sports and things like that. Apparently it's encouraged him to sort of embrace life a bit more.
Well, Benedict Cumberbatch is into like fucking
skydiving and things like that. Yeah.
And like extreme like snowboarding and all that sort of shit.
Yeah. I'll do that a little bit at the end because there's a funny little bit that I just thought, I like to finish off with a silly one. Cumberbatch has central heterochromia, a harmless genetic mutation that makes each eye have multiple colours. Cumberbatch's eyes have a combination of blue, green, and gold. The patterning of these colours is slightly different in each eye. Same thing that David Bowie had.
Actually, it wasn't.
Oh, really? Oh, go on.
David Bowie had one pupil that was a lot smaller than the other.
Ah.
So it was actually what looked heterochromic in David Bowie's case. It was actually an extremely small pupil, and in which case the
eye, maybe the colour of his eye looked different.
Well, no, he just had the thing is his eye. When you look at David Bowie, his irises are both the same colour. It's just that one pupil was minuscule and the other one was regular size, and it came from a schoolyard accident. Oh. But it is always It was always mistaken for heterochromia, but it was actually extreme pupil minimization because he got a whack across the head as a boy.
Well, there you go. I have learned something.
Sorry to be a know-it-all smart arse.
No. That's actually genuinely interesting. Yeah, I always thought he was heterochromic. Equal pay in Hollywood is a hot-button topic, and Cumberbatch has made his stance on the issue very clear by stating that he won't work on a project if his female co-stars aren't being paid the same. Equal pay and a place at the table are the central tenets of feminism, Cumberbatch told the Radio Times. Look at your quotas, ask what women are being paid, and say, if she's not paid the same as the men, I'm not doing it. Good for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's absolutely key to that sort of thing changing, though, is if male actors turn around and say, well, that's not fair, I'm not doing it. If they just go, oh, well, that's just the way the world is, then it's allowed to continue, isn't it? It takes everyone to turn around and stand up to that sort of thing because it is absolutely ridiculous. They're doing the same work.
Stuff like that. You can excise all of the fucking, the culture war driven around it. You can think to yourself, well, I wouldn't like it if somebody who was doing the exact same work as me was getting paid, £10 more an hour for doing exactly what I do.
No, well, when it goes up to a Hollywood pay grade, that gap becomes ridiculous. It becomes in the millions and hundreds of thousands.
I just think if you just have like a rudimentary conscience, you would see that somebody who was doing what you were doing was being paid significantly less. You would think like, well, where's your justification for that? How is that fair? So, yeah.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think more male film stars should take that approach. I think that would actually lead to some real meaningful change.
Yeah.
Good for him. When Cumberbatch worked with the one and only Meryl Streep on the drama August Osage County, he asked her for a little acting advice. I asked her how she approached the multiple layers of her part, he told Vulture. And she said, I don't know. I don't have a process. It changes with every job, doesn't it? And I thought, oh, thank God to hear her say it. This whole thing about technique or method, it's bullshit. People say, oh, you're so precise. But within that, I work very hard to give every part a heartbeat. I learned a lot from just watching Meryl in repose. It was a bit like a Sherlock deduction. It's kind of nice and refreshing to hear as well. I mean, we've done big discussions and things about different acting methods, whether it's the method or memory recall and emotional recall and all this kind of thing. I think it's much truer to what is behind a great performance is the ability to switch between those techniques in order just to get the right the right performance for the right part.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
it makes a lot more sense to me that you would flip between. Oh, for this one, I need to try and live more like the character. Or for this one, it's Gary Oldman always says, doesn't he, that he gets into it by he finds a physical mannerism and lets the character build from there. I remember him saying with his Churchill performance, there was the shoulders. Once he got the shoulders right, the character came from that point.
Yeah, I think having, if you're an actor who has a one-size-fits-all for everything, to me, conceptually, that sounds a bit weird.
And people always bring up Day-Lewis as well as like the ultimate method actor kind of thing. But in the very few interviews that he's given, he talks about how too much is made of it. He goes, I know what I do is kind of ridiculous. Like I take it too far. But for me personally, and I'm just talking about me personally, that's the only way I know how to do it. He's essentially saying I don't have the other techniques.
Yeah,
this is the technique that works.
Day-Lewis is actually a man of very intriguing humility because, as you mentioned, he has said, like, there are so many great actors who are able to just go into it without the kind of preparation that I do. I can't do what they do. So when people say I'm the greatest actor in the entire world, it's like, no, not really. Which I think is very. I mean, I think he's absolutely fucking excellent. But
yeah.
Very, but a very humble guy, and it's a key. It's a sort of, it's an interesting perspective. So.
And my last fact here: Cumberbatch is, somewhat surprisingly, a fan of extreme sports. In his spare time, he's taken part in skydiving, hot air ballooning, skiing, high-speed motorcycling, and scuba diving. In fact, Cumberbatch went skydiving while in New Zealand, surely the perfect place to get above the scenery. It was the most exquisite sensation, and when I landed on the ground, I wanted to do it again, he told Contact Music. I felt incredibly horny as well, because it's such an extreme thing. You think, God, I've just had the most massive bite out of life, and I'm really hungry for more. So that's your takeaway this week, Cinementalists. But when Benedict Cumberbatch skydives, he gets horny.
Why not?
Take that one with you. Yeah.
Damn. Now that's just making me think about people attempting banging in like mid-fall skydive.
Somebody must have shot a porno, at 8,000 feet or whatever, surely. Someone will link it to us anyway.
Like fast-falling doggy.
The potential is literally limitless, isn't it?
Absolutely right, yeah.
But there you go. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our free podcast this week. Thank you so much for listening. We're going to go and record the premium podcast now. Liam's got an extra take, I believe. What are you doing this week?
I'm actually going to have a little bit of a look at the French film from 2007, part of the wave of new French extremity, à l'intérieur, or Inside, as it's known in the Anglosphere. You know Inside?
No, I don't, but gosh, it sounds arty.
It's interesting.
Okay.
in a very good way, I might add. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about it.
And speaking of arty, actually, I'm going to be reviewing Spencer, the new Diana biopic.
Yes. Yeah, I've been curious about this one.
It's a very curious and strange film, indeed quite arty as well. So we're going to be doing a bit of that. And then afterwards, we're going to be having a chat about some of our favourite biopics as well, just to leapfrog off of the subject and pretend we know what we're doing in a smooth segue. We're going to talk about our favourite film biopics and performances of real-life people, etc., etc. If you'd like any of that, please do check out cinementalist.com for a link to our Patreon page. Please do follow us as well on Twitter at Cinementalcast, and you can follow Liam at
the Movies at Wacko Jacko's Flicks.
And I think that sort of wraps it up for this week, mate.
Absolutely.
Anything to add?
Have a good one, and if you don't join us on the premium, we'll see you next time.
Excellent. Thanks very much, guys. See you either in the next one or next week.